Hello, time travelers. This video is a PSA about how eBay ripped me off for about $500, and I think they've recently changed their behavior or their policies, and why I think you should be very, very careful these days when trying to sell something on eBay. This is my look of disapproval. The following is a true story. Some minor details have been changed to protect the innocence of me. Some other issues, which I've heard about recently from a couple of friends. Well, I've heard of a couple of friends who have had similar issues as me in recent weeks. One of them couldn't pay their electric bill, do some shenanigans that a buyer did with trying to return something, and the other one had problems paying his rent with something he was trying to buy, and the money got held up for a long time. It was really weird. So this PSA even goes out to people who spend a lot of money on eBay. So watch this video, learn from my misfortunes, and don't make the same mistake. I sold a GPU a couple of months ago for about $500, and the buyer was in Illinois. Then I paid for the shipping label on eBay for about $25. Then like a week and a half later, they charged my bank for like $75, and I couldn't figure it out until I saw that the tracking was going to frickin' Belgium. But that's not eBay's fault. That's the buyer's weirdness, and it should have been evidence of fraud coming up later on when eBay looked at it, but they completely disregarded that. But that was just the beginning of the weirdness. The return. About a week later, the buyer said they wanted to return the GPU. They said it was overheating. I immediately replied and said it wasn't having problems when I was using it, and I was using it for video editing. So go ahead and send me a screenshot of MSI Afterburner and a picture of your computer with the fans with no dust in them. Because if they're full of dust, it won't adequately cool the computer, obviously. They never responded. After a couple of days of that, eBay started to review the return. I've been selling stuff on eBay for about 17 years, and whenever somebody would do this, say they want to return something, and I send them a message and they don't reply, it just goes away because the person realizes they have to communicate and they don't want to actually provide evidence, and that I'm a savvy seller, so I'm not going to deal with shenanigans. So this means one of two things. Either the buyer opened up a case, or eBay changed their policies. Now that I think of it, or both. The case was open for only 1 day, and then eBay decided in the buyer's favor. Then I only had one choice: to accept the return. But I told eBay I didn't want to take the return because they didn't communicate back with me. So eBay said, send them a message. So I sent them another message. And eBay said, wait 48 hours. So I waited like 4 days and then communicated in eBay chat again. And the only option they had was to report the buyer. But then this was after like a couple hours of me being in chat communicating with someone, and they said, you need to accept a return. But I couldn't find a button to the accept a return. So they said, well, the only option we have is to report the buyer. So they did that, and they did this thing like an appeal or whatever. And it was only open for like 2 days, I think. And then eBay closed the appeal in the buyer's favor. eBay is an epic fail. I used eBay chat support again, and they told me that I had to accept the return. This has never before, in all the 17 years I've been selling stuff on eBay, happened to me. Ever. eBay has always made the buyer communicate before making me accept the return. They would communicate if there's a problem with it when you get it back, you can report the buyer at that point. So let me remind you of the one friend who couldn't pay the electric bill and the other one who couldn't pay the rent. And I had a similar thing going on where I had to use credit cards to buy all my groceries so that I could pay the bills. Because at this time, eBay took the $500 that I thought was mine and took it back out of my account. But there was no option on the eBay item, like when you go to selling and then sold and you find that item and there's just buttons. There was no button at all to accept the return. So I used eBay chat support again. And the only option they had was for me to message the buyer and ask them to initiate the return on their end. Maybe they had buttons that I didn't have, but didn't make sense because I've never seen this before. So I did, and the buyer didn't respond for 4 days. Mind you, the buyer at this time hasn't responded to any of my messages. None of them. So then I'm in eBay chat support again, and they tell me the only option they have is to report the buyer and wait 48 hours to get a message back from eBay, which never came. So I use chat support again, and the only option they have is to report the buyer again and wait 72 hours this time. I say no, and I ask them to call me. So after a long conversation of going back and forth and saying, no, I've already done that, no, I'm not doing that again, for all these options they had, like report the buyer again, message the buyer again. I'm like, no, I've already done that. Then just return it. There's no button to return it. They finally figured out why there's no button to return it, and it was because it was an international freaking sale. Why the freak didn't it? They didn't tell me that before because their support had no idea. When you have an international sale, you're supposed to message the buyer that says, go ahead and return it, and I'll reimburse you for the price of the return label. You just have to send me your PayPal address. This whole time. By this point, it'd been a month after the buyer tried to initiate a return, and they're just finally telling me this. So I did what they said. I sent a message to the buyer and said, go ahead and return it, and I'll reimburse you for the label. And eBay told me to wait 72 hours, and if the buyer does not reply, they would refund my $500. So I waited 5 days just to be sure. eBay is a bunch of liars. So I waited the 5 days and got back into eBay chat support, and I was like, where's my money? So they said they had to report the buyer for not responding to me. And then I had to wait another 48 hours for that. So I waited 3 days. I wasn't calling eBay. I was like, that's enough of this crap. I called my bank and did a chargeback. And they got my money back within a few days. 2 days after that, I get a message from eBay. They're going to charge my bank account for the $500 again. Wow. A message. All these other times, they asked me to wait 48 hours for a message or wait 72 hours for a different sort of message, and I never got a message. Well, I got some messages. The only messages they ever sent me were, I'm going to look down at my list because I looked through all my messages. Thank you for reporting an issue with the buyer. Thank you for chatting with eBay. And the subsequent chat logs, of course. How did we do? Survey crap. And we're taking your money now. But never did they tell me what was going on or why they made this decision. So at this point, I used eBay chat again, and they asked me to message the buyer again. I said, I want to talk to a supervisor. So they escalated me to chat with the supervisor. So that supervisor said that I had to wait 72 hours. No. So I had eBay call me. And I'd explain my whole story again to somebody. And be escalated to a manager. Who again, I had to tell my whole story again. And by the time I told my whole story for probably the 50th time, they said, okay, we're not going to make you wait 48 hours, 72 hours or whatever. I'm going to escalate you to a supervision team person or something. This is a person who said they don't normally take calls, but they're going to look into my issue and see what they can do. And I advise them, if you do not resolve it, I will not trust eBay anymore. Because I've never had this happen before. I've only ever had to chat with eBay once or twice, or most 3 times, and they say, okay, just do this, this, and this, and we'll take care of you. And they always took care of me. And every single one of these people that I used eBay chat with or talked to on the phone always start the conversation with, oh, we see you used eBay for 17 years. Thank you so much. What they could have thanked me with was letting me keep my money and making the buyer accountable for their shenanigans. But anyways, this supervisor person said they were going to take care of it and see what they could do on their end, but they couldn't make any guarantee. But either way, they would call me within 5 days. Guess what? They never called me. Either they did something or the bank did something so that eBay can't charge me, because eBay suspended my account because they couldn't charge me. And I was just basically like, oh, thank God. eBay has been getting weird recently. A couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, Can't be 100%. But eBay forced me to switch to direct charge from my bank account. And they wouldn't let me charge using PayPal anymore. And I believe that was their way of playing the long game to be able to pull money directly out of people's bank accounts. Because you can't just go into your PayPal and say, stop accepting automatic charges from eBay while you deal with eBay. But then, if you look at this video that I have in a card here, I did have a problem where eBay kind of did shenanigans, and I had a couple other similar but not as bad issues where eBay made me do stuff, and I thought, this doesn't make sense. It seemed to be a little bit different before. The last couple times I've had returns, like even easier. The last couple times were really difficult, as in I had to communicate with eBay 2 or 3 times. In the past 17 years, I'd only have to communicate with eBay like once to handle a return. But anyways, I digress. But I think I see a connection between it becoming more difficult to handle a buyer's return and their switch to direct charging to my bank account. Tell me in the comments if you agree. And if I'm thinking of selling any more GPUs in the future, because I was doing mining, so I got over 20 of them, I think I'm going to use Jawa.gg. It's a new website for selling GPUs, and if I'm going to be buying hobby stuff, I'm thinking of using Etsy more. And the great beast Amazon. Ugh. For everything else, some tips for eBay sellers. If you're going to be selling on eBay, set your items to no returns accepted. It's a checkbox when you're setting it up. That makes it so they have to claim that it's not as described in order to return it. Something one of the people in eBay support chat told me was that buyer's remorse, like you buy something that's the wrong size or they decided that they didn't like that color or whatever, is not allowed when you uncheck the box that says returns accepted. They have to claim that it's not as described or different than the posting when they get it. Don't accept international buyers. That's another checkbox when you're selling your item. Number 3, when a buyer asks to return something, ask them to send you evidence of it not being as described. Then if they don't give it, go into eBay chat support and do end up accepting the return. That way when you get it, you can tell eBay that it is as described as when you sold it. Don't let eBay report the buyer until you get it back. Or if you accept the return, because you're not doing an international return, you can buy the label and you don't get it back, you can prove it because the buyer has to use your tracking number that you paid for. And if you don't get it back, the tracking number shows that nothing moved. Or if they sent something else in, you can take a picture of the package next to the thing that they sent back instead of the thing that they were supposed to send back or whatever. You know what I mean. And wrapping up, do you have a similar story to tell or some tips that you can give eBay sellers that I haven't said in this video? Please tell us in the comments and help us out. There was a similar time when someone tried to scam me and I accepted the return and I ended up getting my money back. Click here to see that video. And for a laugh, you could see me make fun of a bunch of crypto mining stuff that I found on eBay in this video down here. And you could subscribe to the channel over here. And thanks for watching my video all the way to the end. It was just this huge rant. And if you haven't clicked like by now, click it. Okay, bye.